welcome to Autism Exchange, the show where two Aspies share the things they're obsessed with. I'm ForceWave.
And I'm HubPie, and Autism Exchanging is just another part of the life of the average Aspie.
And boy, do we have a very autistic episode for you today.
Yeah, well, more like one-sided kind of autism today, because when we started this podcast, when we were talking about the idea for Autism Exchange, this was one of the ones that you would bring up the most, given your opinion of this particular game.
Yeah, this and Metal Gear Solid 4 I've been foreshadowing the most, but for completely opposite reasons.
Yeah, and depending on the section of the fandom you're talking about, I imagine you're gonna get their ire on your opinion of this particular game.
Oh, I welcome their ire. So, continuing our discussion of non-Kojima directed Metal Gear games, today we're going to cover Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance.
Oh boy.
Yeah, I have some choice words for this game. But before then, let's recap the story so far. This is Hideo Kojima speaking at the University of Southern California in 2011.
So even after I die, I still would love to have the Metal Gear Solid series continue. But, you know, as a creator, of course, I want to do something new, and I don't want to be limited to Metal Gear forever, right? So, of course, I have tried in the past. I've tried to hand Metal Gear off to other people within the studio, and I've tried to raise people up so that they have the ability to take over. And I think since Metal Gear Solid 3, I've tried this and actually did hand it off and have other people come up with the story and come up with the game design. But for some reason, it just never really works out. And, I end up having to step in again to take charge and kind of fix things here and there and just get sucked back in, unfortunately. So then after Metal Gear Solid 4, I started to really seriously think about this again. Okay, how can I escape? So then that's when I thought, oh, wait, maybe if it's a spin-off, then maybe, there'll be a little bit more flexibility and I could leave that to some younger staff. So that's where Rising came into the picture, and I'm really trying to be hands-off with that and leaving that to the new team. But of course, I also want to take the numbered series, the official canon Metal Gear, and also hand that off to someone. So I don't know, anybody in the auditorium, are there any takers? Anybody interested?
So again, this is like 2011. This was a couple months before Metal Gear Rising would be re-revealed as a Platinum game. So even back then, Kojima was saying that Metal Gear Rising wouldn't be canon. He has yet to pass down the numbered canon series. And before someone says, well, Peace Walker isn't numbered, Kojima's repeatedly said that the game is effectively a numbered game in every way except actually being numbered.
So is Peace Walker the real Metal Gear Solid 5?
Internally, the game was referred to as Metal Gear Solid 5. I assume Konami marketing put their foot down on that and prevented Kojima from calling a portable game the next main numbered Metal Gear game.
Fair.
Now, you can't really talk about Metal Gear Rising without talking about the game's troubled developmental history. Rising was first teased at the end of Kojima's Game Developer Conference 2009 keynote speech, where he goes over the evolution of Metal Gear's game design, which I highly recommend watching. It's kind of like watching mankind evolve from being a fish to walking upright.
A bunch of retard babies in the meantime.
Yeah. He also foreshadowed the creation of the Vox engine, as well as Kojima's interests in open-world gaming, all of which would culminate in Metal Gear Solid 5. So originally, the team was supposed to work on Metal Gear Solid 5, but not the one we know about. This Metal Gear Solid 5 would have an Arabic numeral, and it would have been about the boss and the Cobra unit during the invasion of Normandy.
I don't know, man. I just don't like that idea, because I already felt like we already had enough information about the boss to where having a game set before Snake Eater just to cover events we already know about just doesn't really sit well with me. It feels like it's less of a game that's made to explore particular themes and made more of just to fill the timeline. I remember you telling me about that off podcast, and I just had a very similar reaction to what I had right now.
Yeah, that's the thing. Kojima doesn't make games just to fill in timeline gaps. He has a story or theme he wants to convey, then retrofits that into the Metal Gear timeline. Like for Peace Walker, he had this idea about exploring the concept of peace and nuclear deterrence in the Cold War arms race. And that's where he came up with the idea of setting the game in Costa Rica, which doesn't have a standing army. So, Peace Walker wasn't made just to fill in gaps in Big Boss's life. Kojima had a point with telling this part of Big Boss's life. But, maybe he had an idea about the boss during World War II. We don't really know, and now that Kojima's gone from Konami, we might never know. But anyway, the younger team was supposed to work on a Metal Gear Solid 5 about the boss. But they weren't comfortable with handling a main numbered entry, so instead they wanted to make a side story. The concept originated with experiments for a cutting mechanic. The team then decided that Raiden would be a good fit for this mechanic. Kojima wrote up a basic synopsis for a story set between Sons of Liberty and Guns of the Patriots, explaining how Raiden became a cyborg and rescued Sonny from the Patriots. The game was originally going to run on the Fox engine, and would be open world. Metal Gear Solid Rising was announced during Microsoft's E3 2009 press conference, much to the dismay of Sony fanboys who only cared about Metal Gear Solid 4, because it was one of the few PlayStation 3 exclusives worth giving a shit about at the time.
Don't worry, later that year they'll get Uncharted 2, so it all evens out.
Yeah. Unlike past console Metal Gear games, Kojima wouldn't be directing the game. Instead, he focused on the recently announced Peace Walker, which he considered a Metal Gear Solid 5 class game. A year later, Kojima announced that, just as Solid Snake had passed the torch to Raiden at the end of Metal Gear Solid 2, he had passed the torch to Shigenobu Matsuyama, whose only previous experience was directing light gun arcade games such as Silent Scope and producing the shitty Silent Hill arcade game. Considering how Raiden's story turns out after Metal Gear Solid 2, Kojima's analogy could be seen as a bad omen.
Yeah, well, Raiden got fixed in Metal Gear Solid 4 at the end, so who knows, maybe they would have had a similar story here.
Maybe. Meanwhile, the story would be written by Etsu Tamari, who was one of the contributors of the self-contradicting Metal Gear Solid 4 database. He had the one that said that Arsenal Gear crashed into Manhattan both because Solidus lost control of Arsenal Gear and because it was his last stand against the Patriots. And that Big Boss was a snatcher.
Not exactly the most reassuring company, I imagine.
Now, in all fairness, he also contributed to the briefing tapes in Peace Walker, which were very well received. In an E3 2010 roundtable discussion, Matsuyama said that he wanted Rising to become a sub-series to the Metal Gear Solid series, with a leapfrog-like release schedule, similar to Call of Duty, where it was Infinity War, then Treyarch, Infinity War, Treyarch, Infinity War, Treyarch, which, for many of us on the Snake Soup, this all sounded worse and worse.
Yeah, because, I get it. There are franchises that can do something of that effect. I don't think Metal Gear is really the series that should go in that kind of direction.
Applying the factory mentality to a personal expression like Metal Gear is a recipe for disaster. And speaking of which, Matsuyama also noted that although past Metal Gear Solid games had an emphasis on social commentary, Metal Gear Solid Rising will be going in a different direction, instead focusing on action.
So this is that image training Raiden was talking about in Metal Gear Solid 2.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm not gonna tiptoe this anymore. This sounds like the people who were making this looked at the people bitching about Raiden and just said, fuck it. You want your cool Raiden? Here's your cool Raiden. Even though it goes against everything Raiden is as a character. Fuck it. You happy now, idiots?
It's Ninja Raiden in Metal Gear Solid 4, but without the irony. Even though the irony is what made it work in Metal Gear Solid 4.
Yeah, well, these kinds of people don't understand intent, so you gotta really expect them to understand what Kojima was going for.
Now, of course, as a young, relatively new Metal Gear fan, I was horrified by everything initially, but eventually I came to terms with the project. After all, the game was set between Sons of Liberty and Guns of the Patriots, so the damage done to Raiden's character would be minimal, because no matter what, it would all funnel down to Metal Gear Solid 4 and Raiden's happy ending.
I have a revelation to make.
Yeah?
This was one of the very first Metal Gear things that I saw. Of course, I knew about the time paradox and the Snake, can you hear me? And cardboard boxes, but this was the first Metal Gear game I learned about through, I think it was Game Informer, where it was during its Solid Rising days. So when the game got re-revealed as Metal Gear Rising Revengeance, I didn't know that was a different project from the Metal Gear Solid Rising article I read in Game Informer. And I had no opinion of it because I had no idea what the fuck any of this was.
Oh yeah, by the time I became a Metal Gear fan, both Peace Walker and Metal Gear Solid Rising were already announced. So as far as I was a Metal Gear fan, I was aware of Rising. So when I got to the end of Metal Gear Solid 4 and Sonny said, "Come quick, they're ready!" Sort of like the sun. It's rising again. I at least thought of Metal Gear Solid Rising, even though back then it was set between 2 and 4. So, that connection didn't really make sense.
If you force it enough.
Yeah. So anyway, after wrapping up work on Peace Walker, Kojima checked up on the Rising team's progress, and found that everything was on fire, and that the team members had resorted to cannibalism.
I was only gone for 5 minutes! What happened?
The team had a hard time balancing the cutting mechanics with the action and stealth elements of the game. As a result, Kojima decided to cancel the game quietly, though he still wanted the game's concept to live on. Now, that's Kojima's official story, as he details in the video The Truth Behind Metal Gear Rising. If I could indulge in a little bit of speculation, I think Kojima just needed to find a way to salvage all the time and money wasted on this disastrous project, so that Konami doesn't decide to make Kojima Productions go the way of Team Silent.
Oh boy.
Yeah, people who think that Konami can continue the series without Kojima or Kojima Productions needs to take a look at Silent Hill after Team Silent. Just give up hope, please.
I mean, one franchise's fate doesn't have to follow suit for another. For all we know, Silent Hill could just be the eternally unlucky video game franchise.
Right, but Konami was managing Silent Hill. Why would they handle Metal Gear any better?
I mean, yeah, to be fair on what you said, the first Silent Hill game to not have Team Silent was a disastrous prequel to the original game.
Which contradicted a lot of the original game's lore.
Hey, Alessa's the devil! She's a problem child!
And because a lot of Silent Hill fans are smarter than Metal Gear fans, Walter Sullivan's circumcision theories notwithstanding, a lot of Silent Hill fans do not count any post-Team Silent games as canon.
I wouldn't count Silent Hill Origins as canon, considering that it just ruins the first game.
Exactly. Speaking of which, so Kojima commissioned Platinum Games to reboot the project, with a tight 2-year deadline. Because again, Kojima had to make his paymasters happy. Like I said in the last episode, Kojima is divided between his business obligations and his creative obligations. As we'll see later, Metal Gear Rising is very much a business obligation. He needed to make this work, or else Konami will rear their ugly head on Kojima Productions. Once Platinum took over the project, they turned the game into a linear character action game with a scaled-back but still impressive cutting mechanic. Matsuyama would be replaced by veteran Kojima Productions AI programmer Yuji Korkado. For those who have watched Hideo Kojima's Gene, you may remember Yuji Korkado as the person Kojima asked, "How on earth could you be making games with that mindset?" For context, the debate was Yuji Korkado wanted to stabilize the game, whereas Kojima wanted to polish it and make it the best it can be. Now, I'm not saying either one is right or wrong, but my point is, it shows their different priorities. Kojima wants to make the game the best it can be. Yuji Korkado wants to uphold the release date. So, Yuji Korkado's the business guy, Kojima's the creative guy. This dichotomy is going to be very important for later. Platinum Games also decided to set the game after Metal Gear Solid 4, to allow more creative freedom for the story and gameplay.
Alright, since you are following the game live, how did this news make you feel?
Dead inside.
I know the feeling.
It's like, I was already skeptical of Rising, I just wanted them to stop making Metal Gear games. But I found solace in the fact that at least whatever damage done in Metal Gear Solid Rising would be minimal. But setting it after Raiden's story was supposed to end, the people behind the game says it offers more creative freedom, but really that should make it even more of a tightrope. Because if you fuck it up, you end up ruining the entire saga. Because Raiden represents Solid Snake's hope in future generations. Raiden represents Solid Snake trying to prove Big Boss wrong, when he said that once you've tasted the battlefield, you're doomed to die on the battlefield.
I think at that point, Kojima, just considering the disastrous development, was like, fuck it, I need this game to be out and released any way it can be.
I want to go over evidence for that later on.
Mm-hmm.
But for now, the game was then re-revealed as Metal Gear Rising Revengeance at the 2011 Video Game Awards, much to the horror of everyone on the Snake Soup. In fact, one person commented, "It was like watching the Twin Towers fall. Like, is this real? Is this actually happening?"
A little extreme, but I guess I can kind of sympathize.
Okay, before people bitch in the comments, obviously a shitty video game doesn't compare to the tragedy and loss of life in 9/11. What the guy was talking about was the sensation of disbelief that watching both things had on the brain. Obviously, one is infinitely worse than the other.
You bring up 9/11, oh boy, I can't wait for that to be relevant later in this podcast.
Oh my god!
Oh boy.
The following year marked the 25th anniversary of the Metal Gear series. The first footage of Ground Zeroes was released, and a few months later, a trailer for a mysterious game called The Phantom Pain was showed off at the Game Awards.
Conspiracy mode activate.
Regarding Ground Zeroes, Kojima explains, "Over the past 25 years, I tried to work with the Metal Gear series to try to introduce more mature themes. But really, it hasn't happened yet, compared to movies or books. There's still a long way to go. That's precisely what I want to try and tackle with my next project, Ground Zeroes. I'm going to target a lot of taboos, a lot of mature themes that are really quite risky. Honestly, I'm not even sure if I'll be able to release the game. And even if I did release the game, maybe it wouldn't sell, because the themes would be just too much. But as a creator, I want to take that risk. As a producer, it's my job to try to sell the game. But I'm approaching this project from the point of view of a creator, and I'm prioritizing creativity over sales. It's very possible that sometime in the future, after Ground Zeroes is out, I may be called up by management who will say, 'Kojima, what are you doing? Ground Zeroes isn't selling. What have you done?' At that point, I'll hopefully be able to say, 'Don't worry, Metal Gear Rising is selling well.' And likewise, Kojima would go on to say that he hopes to do a sequel to Metal Gear Rising. And here he confesses, this is his quote, 'And of course, my ulterior motive is that if Metal Gear Rising 2 came out, it would be guaranteed to sell, which means I wouldn't have to worry about that with Ground Zeroes. I can just do whatever I want.' So to put it simply, Kojima allowed Metal Gear Rising to exist to make his Konami paymasters happy, while also giving him creative cover to do whatever he wants with Metal Gear Solid 5. Whereas Rising is a commercial product to be consumed and shit out, Kojima hopes that Ground Zeroes, or really Metal Gear Solid 5, would be free of any creative limitations from Konami. Which is hilarious looking back, but, he tried.
There was an attempt.
Which brings us to the game's release. The game got good reviews, and was praised for its gameplay, and many Metal Gear fans were surprised to find many of the hallmarks of a Metal Gear story in Rising, such as child soldiers, corrupt US government, some meta commentary, and even cardboard boxes. And compared to Capcom's recent DMC reboot, Rising was seen as a godsend to fans of the genre. So in general, both fans and the general public were happy with Metal Gear Rising. The only person who had a problem with the game was me.
You live in a society.
Yep. But first, let's talk about the positives. Now, Hub, pretend that the game isn't a Metal Gear game.
Okay.
Did you like it?
It was okay.
Really? Just okay?
Yeah, I mean, I'm no character action game expert, but as I played this game, I was like, yeah, it's fun, but I just didn't really think the combat lived up to its fullest potential. Because I felt like the side weapons were very bare bones. I would have preferred being able to switch my main weapon to one of the sub-weapons. Maybe mix up more weapons for more variation in how you fight. I also wish the cutting mechanic was applied more throughout the game because it was mainly used to cut down armor, cut down limbs, and to have a very cathartic fuck you slashing bit. So when the game introduced boss fights that required me to make more extensive use out of the cutting mechanic with things like Sundowner's shield or Senator Armstrong throwing debris at me, I felt like the game at that point hadn't really conditioned me to look for alternate solutions to go into fights. Because the game conditioned me to charge in, blazing in, with the occasional running if I had to encounter, like, Gecko and some other shit. So I felt like the game's strategy was very, like, one note most of the time.
I remember a couple months back you were playing the living shit out of Devil May Cry 3.
That game is so good.
Now, see, I'm not really into those games, so when I played Rising, I was really into the fluid movement and how easy it is to pick up and play. Okay, granted, the parrying was kind of weird, but it's kind of like CQC in Metal Gear Solid 3.
Or to use a character action example, Royal Guard from Devil May Cry.
Sure, where it's a little finicky to get the hang of, but once you figure it out, it's actually pretty cool.
Oh, no doubt. It's satisfying to parry, because I actually got better at parrying. I would restart boss fights through various sections just to be like, okay, what can I parry? What can I not parry? And I would practice parrying, and it actually made for some of the more satisfying moments in the game for me. Like, the boss fight with Jetstream Sam, I'd say, is probably my favorite in the entire game, because it felt like it was the only boss fight that had a fair difficulty of player expectations of the parrying system, and it also felt fair. Fuck you, Monsoon. Whereas most of the game, again, to me, was just very run slash... It kind of felt like I was going through the motions after a while. What makes something like Devil May Cry 3 more interesting to me is the fact that that game had a multitude of different weapons and guns to be able to juggle enemies with. So when you have a game like Metal Gear Rising that has only one main weapon and about 3 or 4 other weapons, and then you have a really awful sub-weapon mechanic that I just hate how it's implemented, it felt very clunky to me, having to switch between different sub-weapons and items. I felt like that could have been handled so much better, because you have to stop and you have to press left or right on the D-pad to get the menu up, and that to me just really kills the flow of the combat.
Yeah, I don't even bother using the sub-weapons, I just use my tool of justice.
Yeah, I learned real quick that sub-weapons were absolutely useless, so what was even the point of having them?
I did like the pole arm, though. I used that initially.
I switched it up a lot, so my favorite was the Sai, where you would pull yourself towards the enemy. That was a pretty satisfying weapon for me.
The thing with my experience with Devil May Cry 3 is the movement is kind of stiff to me. That's why I like Metal Gear Rising for its fluidity.
Yeah, like, Devil May Cry's not for everyone, so I understand if something like Metal Gear Rising suits more to your taste. I just wish Metal Gear Rising had a better flow with its gameplay, because it just felt, I wouldn't say mindless, but it was very fluid, and it looked really cool, and I felt badass. But at worst, it felt extremely clumsy. And I know games like this are games where you have to learn. That's why they're so short, because they're replayable, and the more you replay them, the better you get at them. But whereas something with Devil May Cry 3, it was really fun for me to learn as brutal as that game can get. With Metal Gear Rising, combining the underutilized, more intricate cutting mechanics sections and the very stiff item selection, and admittedly shallow combat just kind of makes it hard for me to want to learn the game more.
Maybe the reason I like Rising is just that it's, to put it in elitist terms, baby's first character action game.
I'm not that elitist towards stuff like this, because I haven't really played a whole lot of character action games. It's just, I kind of wish that Rising's gameplay was a bit more refined, but I'm gonna contribute that to the game's troubled production.
And they only had 2 years to develop it. It was a very quick turnaround because they had to make up for all the lost time made on the old Rising project.
And to give them credit, at least from a game perspective, I feel like it could have been so much worse. It's actually kind of commendable how the game turned out, despite all that trouble.
Now, to be clear, I do not blame Platinum for any of my criticisms about the game. Well, okay, they're the ones who wanted to set the game after Metal Gear Solid 4, but Kojima Productions could have just pushed back.
I think it's pretty clear that Rising wasn't their top priority.
Kojima Productions was in charge of the story, Platinum Games was in charge of the gameplay. And for that, Platinum Games, I felt, did a fantastic job. And later on, they would go on to work on Nier Automata, which combined their amazing gameplay with Yoko Taro's idiosyncratic storytelling. He's like Hideo Kojima if Hideo Kojima was more of a weirdo otaku.
So, Otacon.
Pretty much.
Yeah, I want to say right now that even though I have my criticisms of Rising's gameplay, I don't think Rising's a bad game. It's just not really my kind of action game.
Now, I think we can both agree that this game's soundtrack is fucking bitchin'.
Yes, I fucking adore this game's soundtrack. It's amazing.
And it will come like a flood of rain in the final hour. Something, 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 something.
Yeah, so
something
I wanna...
disappear.
Yeah, so...
Go on.
Okay, so one thing I want to reveal is that during these podcasts, I put music on, lower volume so I can still hear you. Sometimes I put Ruby music on. Sometimes I put some other stuff I have on iTunes. Recently, I've been putting Metal Gear Rising soundtrack on, and, it's fantastic.
Oh, it's fucking incredible. It fits the game's stupid, cheesy tone perfectly.
Yeah. I think my favorite track in the entire game is It Has to Be This Way, which is the final boss theme. I'd say it's probably one of my favorite final boss themes of all time. Like, it's an amazing song.
If Senator Armstrong was in any other video game, he would be one of the best final bosses in video game history.
Yeah, we'll get into more of this later, but I just want to say on Senator Armstrong, as short-lived as his time in this game was, he does leave one hell of an impression.
And what's funny is you finished a game on the 4th of July.
Yeah, so what better way of celebrating America by fucking destroying an American bastard?
He's the epitome of neoconservative American exceptionalism.
Yeah, but yeah, no, this soundtrack is fucking fantastic.
Speaking of bosses, to be honest, the bosses in this game have slightly more personality than most of the bosses since Metal Gear Solid 3.
They're very memorable bosses, some for the wrong reasons, but I'd say, yeah, each of them had some kind of lasting effect, whether it's their music or just individual moments. Like, I remember Sundowner for his fucking pedo face.
Or his troll face.
I'm fucking invincible!
I showed you that meme of Metal Gear discussions before Rising, and it's like Plato, postmodernism, the Art Deco cover of Atlas Shrugged. And then there's Metal Gear discussions after Rising, and it's all just various Sundowner faces.
Yeah.
Which is 100% accurate.
I wouldn't know, because I'm not entrenched in Metal Gear like you are.
Yeah. Also, the codec is a lot more expansive than it was in Metal Gear Solid 4.
Refreshingly so.
And what's funny is, it was all done by one guy, Etsu Tamari, who also wrote the main story. Originally, Etsu Tamari asked to have more help with writing the codec conversations, but because Kojima just saw this as a quick cash grab so that he could have more creative freedom with Metal Gear Solid 5, he was like, if Tamari can't do it on his own, don't bother doing it. And so Tamari stepped up to the fucking plate and really did a lot to flesh out this world. Yeah, I was really big into Deus Ex Human Revolution and transhumanism, so I was really excited about this transhuman take on the Metal Gear universe.
Oh boy, would that end up backfiring?
Yeah, believe it or not, I was actually looking forward to this game for a hot second. Then it came out, and I played it, and got to the end. But putting that aside, my absolute favorite thing about Metal Gear Rising is Sunny!
Baby girl returns.
And she's in character.
I remember one codec conversation when I'm fighting Armstrong that you said was like the best written part of the entire game.
Yeah, like, in that boss fight, Raiden's like, oh, I said my sword was a tool of justice. Now I'm not so sure. And besides, this isn't my sword. So, Jack the Ripper. But then he calls Sonny, and he's like, don't give up hope, Sonny. We saved America from the Patriots. I'm not going to let Armstrong turn it into a wasteland. And I'm like, why can't we have that Raiden in the cutscenes? That's Raiden in character.
Well, you see, it's because Raiden has to embrace his trauma, or he'll be weak, and then embracing his trauma makes him stronger.
We're gonna get to that. We're not at the negatives yet.
Yeah, I know.
I love that her flight suit has a patch of the philanthropy symbol. You know, that kanji that Calling Otacon has if you play in the prologue part of Metal Gear Solid 4. The one with the text, "To let the world be," beneath it. And also, if you look closely at her name tag, it says Sunny Emmerich. So Otacon adopted her.
Good dad, Otacon.
And it's like, and she has a blue rose lapel pin as a nod to Naomi Hunter. I love everything about Sunny. Like, even the little details in her design is perfect. Her codec conversations in the last mission were my favorite parts of the game. Okay, so if I'm ever put in charge of Metal Gear and I make it explicitly clear that Rising is not canon, it was never canon, if I ever make a new game, I would do what George Lucas and Disney did with the expanded universe and pick and choose elements of Rising that I like and, canonize Sunny and Solus. Because that actually makes sense for her character. Just like how Disney canonized Thrawn in Star Wars Rebels.
I would actually canonize Wolf, because I love that guy.
Yeah, that's another thing. Blade Wolf. He's kind of like, in this game, Raiden is supposed to be the mentor Solid Snake figure, when he's written well, while Wolf is similar to Raiden in Metal Gear Solid 2. And just like how Solid Snake helped free Raiden in MGS2, Raiden helps free Blade Wolf.
Yeah, I thought all of that was really cool. Also, Blade Wolf's face looks like Wolverine's mask.
I never noticed that.
No, when I first fucking saw him, I was like, that's fucking Wolverine's mask.
And hey, you know what? Just like Raiden in Metal Gear Solid 2, Blade Wolf got a happy ending. He's hanging out with Sunny in Solus.
Yep.
If only. So yeah, as a non-canon Metal Gear game, I think the game's great. Up there with Ghost Babel in terms of non-canon Metal Gear games. The problem is, that's not how the game was advertised. Because Mr. Yuji, how on earth could you be developing games with that mindset, Coricado, did an interview with Machinima.com, and he said that although Rising is a spin-off, it takes place after Metal Gear Solid 4, so yes, it is canon, and it is part of the timeline. So regardless of whatever Kojima says after the fact, Yuji Coricado was the project leader for Metal Gear Rising. So it was his intent, and the intent of those who worked on the game, for this to be part of the same overall storyline as the rest of the series. So Hub, with that in mind, did you like it?
No. Not really. Granted, I'm not as offended by this game's story as you are, but as a whole, I was not very impressed, and some of its implications really disgusted me. And I would be more disgusted if this game was actually canon.
A lot of people seem confused by the fact that the game's story was handled by Kojima Productions. They think that Kojima himself was involved with the story, but on Twitter, he made it explicitly clear that he had nothing to do with the game's script or anything to do with the game's universe. He said that Rising is a new kind of Metal Gear without his creativity.
Yeah, and it shows. One of your codec contacts, Courtney, talks about how cyborgs are like the new SOPs. And I'm like, fuck you. SOPs were destroyed at the end of Guns of the Patriots. So what happened? Did they just hide underground or some shit? I thought destroying the Patriots meant that the world was at peace again. I know evil will always exist and peace won't be maintained forever, but only 4 years after Guns of the Patriots? We couldn't even wait a decade before any of this happened?
Drebin did kind of say that things weren't all sunshine and rainbows.
I know that. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying all the problems would be solved if the Patriots were destroyed. But this game basically says, yeah, well, you destroyed the Patriots, but fuck you, I guess. So that sense of finality that Metal Gear Solid 4 had, doesn't matter. That's it. No, it doesn't matter.
And what's funny is someone defended Metal Gear Rising by saying that it shows the world that Liquid Ocelot predicted, a world that descended into chaos, like the Wild West. Even though Sunny's modifications to Fox Alive prevented world chaos.
Fuck you, Sunny, I guess.
I thought that was a funny way to defend a game. It's like, wow, way to self-own.
Yeah, I'm not really fond of whenever people say, well, you see, this game's good because it did this. Yeah, I mean, it did do that, but why does that make that good? And no one is able to answer that.
And the thing it depicts doesn't even make any sense. Fox Alive should have prevented what Liquid Ocelot predicted.
Yeah, well, that didn't happen.
So the big controversy with this game for the 5 people who have a problem with this game is that Raiden seemingly abandons his family, gives up on trying to be a better person, and embraces Jack the Ripper. Kojima was asked by the Arab Gamer, the site's down, but you can type up what I'm saying and you'll find other people copying and pasting this. It's still posted on Metal Gear Solid forums, if you Google it. The Arab Gamer. Raiden in Metal Gear Solid 4 was sort of a family man. He was mainly fighting for Rose and his son. Yet in the latest Metal Gear Rising trailer, you see him killing people relentlessly like a mad dog. What happened? Hideo Kojima? Well, originally, I had planned a story for Raiden. It would take place before the events of MGS4, and would explain a lot of his story and how he became a cyborg. Then the project was taken over by Platinum Games, who then became in charge of Raiden's character. They wanted to create a story after the events of MGS4. The Arab Gamer. So they basically made him the crazy Jack we saw in the trailer? Hideo Kojima? Yeah, they wanted to take that direction. So, he's not even defending it. He's just saying, not my fault.
Look, man, this game had a fucking disastrous developmental cycle. I need this game fucking out or Konami will rip my goddamn head off.
Now, some people defend the idea of Raiden continuing to fight after Metal Gear Solid 4, after what seemed to be his logical conclusion, by pointing out the many times that Solid Snake was dragged out of retirement. Which is a good point. Yeah, it's not like there wasn't an entire game about why Raiden shouldn't imitate Solid Snake.
What are you talking about? Metal Gear Solid 2 was totally why Raiden should be like Snake.
I know, right?
I mean, he has a cool blade, therefore he's cooler than Snake, because Snake doesn't like blades, and that's him being a pussy faggot.
Remember that part in Metal Gear Solid 4 where Snake tells Raiden, I'm a shadow, one that no light will shine on. As long as you follow me, it'll be super poggers.
Raiden, give in to your trauma. We have muffins.
And what's frustrating is the game is impossible to criticize, because you have one group of people who are like, hey, this game is surprisingly deep. It has child soldiers, corrupt US government, cardboard boxes, and even some meta commentary. It has all the hallmarks of a Metal Gear game. Then people like you and me will come in and say, oh no, this is horrible. This game doesn't do Metal Gear justice at all. It completely goes against everything that the prior game stood for. And then another group of fans will come in and tell us, dude, don't take this so seriously. It's just a goofy spin-off.
You know what? I would agree with that camp. Had this not been set in the Metal Gear universe, a franchise that pushed boundaries of storytelling in video games.
And also, why aren't you bitching to the first group? They're the ones saying this game's story is surprisingly deep. It's just because we're criticizing the game, whereas those people are praising it.
But you see, those people are under the Patriots' control. They'll look the other way if it suits their narrative.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I want to make clear, I don't have an issue if you like Rising or its story. That was just a joke.
Right. Now, Hub wasn't there in the Metal Gear community in the lead up to Metal Gear Rising or its aftermath.
No, I was very much of the Autistic Hedgehog fandom at the time.
Right, so what I did was I created a bit of a simulation, perhaps. More like a play. A play that I call Every Metal Gear Rising Debate Ever. And so I wrote up this script. I will play the part of Straw M. Anakin, while Hub plays the part of Chad Logic Man.
What kind of fucking names are these?
Well, you see, these names are derived from the Death Stranding school of character names.
Does Death Stranding have characters with names this stupid?
The guy who gives you orders is called Die Hardman.
Oh my god.
And his real name is John McClane.
You know what? I figured that was where that was headed. I was like, either that or he named himself Bruce Willis.
Alright, do you have your script ready?
Yes, I do.
Alright, 3, 2, 1...
Man, Metal Gear Rising is terrible as a Metal Gear game.
Duh! Because it's Metal Gear Rising, not Metal Gear Solid.
But I didn't say Metal Gear Solid. I said Metal Gear.
But Rising has child soldiers, corrupt US government, cardboard boxes, and even some meta-commentary. The game is surprisingly deep.
That's just, like, surface-level stuff, meant to fool you into thinking that it's a proper Metal Gear story. In reality, it lacks the substance of a real Metal Gear game.
That's because it's Metal Gear Rising, not Metal Gear Solid. You have to judge Rising as its own thing.
Well, you see, I would, if the lead producer didn't say that the game was meant to be canon with the rest of the series.
And what's wrong with that? The game has child soldiers, corrupt US government, cardboard boxes, and even some meta-commentary. It has all the hallmarks of a true Metal Gear story.
Again, that's just the game trying to be a poor man's imitation of Metal Gear. The way that the game handles issues of mental health, trauma, and espouses a fatalistic message is totally at odds with the Metal Gear games directed by Hideo Kojima. The game doesn't belong in the same storyline as the rest of the series.
That's because it's Metal Gear Rising, not Metal Gear Solid. They're two different things with their own unique themes and messages. The game is a spin-off, not meant to be judged as a main entry.
Okay, so if you insist that they'd be judged separately, can I consider them separate canonically?
What? No. The game is totally canon. It shows what happens after Metal Gear Solid 4. And it has child soldiers, corrupt US government, cardboard boxes, and even some meta-commentary.
But you just said that the game's a spin-off, separate from the main Metal Gear Solid series.
Just because it's a spin-off doesn't mean it's non-canon. Better Call Saul is a spin-off prequel to Breaking Bad.
Okay, so am I allowed to criticize Rising as a canon story?
No, because it's Metal Gear Rising, not Metal Gear Solid.
Will you stop doing that? You can't insist that the game is canon to the rest of the series, and then when the game is criticized for being canon, fall back on the "it's just a spin-off" excuse. You're trying to have your cake and eat it too. Either the game is part of the overall storyline, and is thus open to criticism about how it impacts the characters, story, and themes of the series, or it's just a goofy spin-off that's unrelated to the rest of the main storyline, and should be judged as its own thing. You can't have it both ways.
But it's Metal Gear Rising!
Fuck you!
The end.
I take it this is from personal experience?
Yes. So many people use that, dude, it's Metal Gear Rising, not Metal Gear Solid non-argument to dismiss any criticism of the game.
Ugh.
And it's stupid because Metal Gear 1 and 2 for the MSX weren't Metal Gear Solid either, but they're still canon.
Well, that's because, 10 people played the MSX games, okay?
Fair enough. One of the most famous analysis videos of Metal Gear Rising is this video called Give War a Chance by Celia Wagner. The video argues that Metal Gear Rising is a meta-commentary on story-focused games. It's deconstructing the idea of playing a game for its story, rather than enjoying the gameplay for its own sake.
That sounds like my experience with Mass Effect 1. That's for a different podcast.
Coming soon, Maddie Effect.
Yeah.
Featuring our friend, Maddie.
Yep.
So Miss Wagner argues that Raiden coming to terms with the fact that his ideals of fighting for justice, even if it means slaughtering so many people, is just an excuse for him to slaughter an ungodly amount of people. So in the scene where he embraces Jack the Ripper, he's disregarding all narrative motivations for fighting. He only kills because he thinks it's fun. Just like how most players play games and kill in these games because it's fun. So just like in Metal Gear Solid 2, Raiden is a surrogate for the player. But whereas in Metal Gear Solid 2, Raiden throws away the dog tags with the player's name on them, in Metal Gear Rising, his interests are in alignment with that of the players. They both just want to enjoy the gameplay. They both just want to kill. Story be damned. What do you think of that?
No. Okay, no. I can tell you right now that me killing people in games has... I have never played a game just because, ooh, I get to kill people, that's awesome. No, that's never why I played a game. What? I feel like this person's point is kind of shallow. It just assumes that, oh, you only play games just because you want to kill and for the gameplay and nothing else. Like, sure, I play games for the gameplay, but that's not all I play the games for. If I only played games for the gameplay, I would have stopped playing Mass Effect 1 after 2 hours because I hated that game's gameplay. That game's story and characters kept me engaged to finish it.
Another reason why Miss Wagner's argument falls flat is that, although he initially admits that his higher ideals and higher goals, his narrative goals, was just an excuse for him to go on a killing spree, right after that scene, right after he defeats Monsoon, he tells Kevin that he's going to save the brains. The child brains undergoing the Liberian Sears program, similar to what Raiden went through as a child, but in VR. So, he still has a narrative reason for why he goes out and kills. It's just that now he has a higher-pitched Christian Bale Batman voice, which is cringy as fuck, and has a new superpower. Yeah, this game portrays Raiden's mental health issues and trauma as something he can turn on and off, as an ability that lets him carve up enemies like butter. Now, Hub, you're studying psychology currently, is that correct?
Yes, I am, with an added degree of school psychology, which also deals with child psychology.
Did what I just say make any goddamn sense?
No. I know it's supposed to be a game, but being able to turn off trauma like that makes me wish I can do that. Hell, anyone would love to turn off their trauma at will, but that's not how trauma works. Like, at all.
I was telling my friend who's a survivor about how Metal Gear Rising deals with mental health, and she was like, man, I wish I could turn off my psychological triggers at will.
Yeah, right.
There's that scene where Raiden tries to shake Blade Wolf's hand, but Wolf refuses. And so he goes a little bit of Ripper right in front of Sonny, but he just, cools down quickly. So I was like, what the fuck? So is Raiden's trauma now just a joke?
I don't know if that was the implication or not. My better judgment in people assumes that it's not meant to be a joke, but who knows?
I don't think they thought this through. They just thought they wanted this gameplay mechanic where you press both analog sticks in to have more power. And so they retrofitted Raiden's existing backstory into that without really thinking about how problematic that is.
Yeah. Which, this is going to lead to one of my biggest criticisms with Rising as a whole. It really feels like this game could have benefited a lot from a morality system where, between the codec calls and the way Raiden is portrayed in the main story, it really feels like they really should have went with this system where if you kill more people or if you activate Jack the Ripper more, you'll begin to lose your codec calls, they'll stop calling you, and you start to become more malicious, and the game's story dictates that reflection. It's like, oh, you embrace the Ripper, therefore you face the consequences of it. Meanwhile, if you decide to actually be what Raiden should be in this scenario, you tried not to kill anyone, or at least you tried to kill as the least amount of people feasible, which includes the bosses. You rescue more civilians, which is something you can do, and I felt it was really half-assed in the gameplay. And that way you keep your codec conversations. But it really feels underdeveloped as a mechanic, and even then, Jack the Ripper doesn't do something like what Devil Trigger does in Devil May Cry, where not only does it give you access to new moves with your weapons, but it also heals you. All you get with Ripper mode is you kill enemies faster. That's it. That's really kind of underwhelming as a power-up mechanic, if you ask me.
I only really use it for the gecko and armored enemies.
Yeah, otherwise I just don't really see the point of using it.
So your idea is similar to Hyper Mode in Metroid Prime 3 Corruption?
Yes, except going in Ripper mode doesn't eventually kill you if you stay in it for too long.
Well, that actually would make sense for that to happen. After the Crying Wolf battle, Rose will comment about how if the mental health of the Beauty and Beast aren't properly taken care of, they eventually won't be fit for combat at all. And like I said in a Metal Gear Solid 4 episode, it's very Kojima-esque to have the player think of their player avatar as a pet that they have to take care of. Like in Metal Gear Solid 4, you manage Old Snake's mental well-being.
Yeah.
Now, the thing that annoys me the most about Metal Gear Rising is people praise its shallow meta-commentary because all of Desperado critiques Raiden's Tool of Justice credo, calling him out on his bluff. There's that scene where Sam has the enemies broadcast their fears for Raiden to hear, but then Raiden still kills them. The reason this doesn't make any sense is because Raiden should already know that war isn't black and white. At the end of Metal Gear Solid 2, aboard Arsenal Gear, Raiden tells Solid Snake, people will only remember the good part, the right part in what you did. To which Solid Snake replies, there's no right part in murder. Not ever. So you should already know that killing isn't something you should handle lightly. Which is why it rings hollow when the game later deconstructs Raiden's stupid tool of justice philosophy. And also that scene with the enemies broadcasting their emotions is full of shit because, believe it or not, you can defeat enemies without killing them. Just cut off their legs and wait a bit for them to disappear. The combat results screen will even acknowledge that you didn't kill them.
Man, I wish the game gave me an incentive to do that. Or at least told me I can do that. But it never gives me an incentive to do that. It just says, yeah, kill people. Who cares? In fact, if you kill people in a certain way, you can get all your Ripper meter and your health back. So, what is the benefit of non-lethally defeating enemies if I get no benefit from that?
None, because even the story will act like you're still a remorseless killer.
Yeah, so it's what's the point then? It's not like previous games like Metal Gear Solid 2 where I choose not to kill just to help Raiden overcome his trauma. Yeah, he was a child soldier and he killed tons of people, but I like having my M9 just so Raiden can overcome those feelings. So when you have a game like Rising that never gives you any reason to non-lethally kill anyone, it just makes me think, well, what's the point then? What is the point of having the option if it's not going to give me any benefits?
That whole scene with the guards broadcasting their emotions is a poor man's Sorrow's River, because the Sorrow's River is actually dynamic and responds to how you play the game. It's not fucking presumptuous like it is in Rising. So, Hub, I have some devil's advocate questions to press you on.
Alright, bring them on.
Do you honestly think that Raiden would be cured of all his trauma just by hearing a couple of pretty speeches from Solid Snake?
No, that's not how that works. If anything, the speeches from Solid Snake should be the wake-up call for Raiden to start bettering himself. Speeches should never be the thing that cures people. It should be the beginning.
Yeah, I get that question a lot posed to me, and it's always annoying. I'm not saying Raiden will have no mental problems going forward. My point is, he'll make an effort to be better and do better. As opposed to in Rising, where he has completely given up and just embraces his worst impulses, abandoning his family in the process. On the other hand, Raiden is able to channel his trauma towards a good cause. Isn't that a good thing?
I don't know, man. I feel okay, the whole, but he's channeling his trauma for a good cause thing. I mean, given how Metal Gear Solid 4 portrayed Raiden as being, even more mentally fucked, I don't know if I would say he's using his trauma for the good, or the greater good. Especially since Metal Gear Solid 4 establishes that he's the happiest when he's not fighting.
Well, Metal Gear Solid 4 already ruined Raiden's character, so you can't really blame Rising for continuing that.
Okay, buddy, that's, ruining his character? No, if anything, Raiden's character in Metal Gear Solid 4 was to show that he didn't take the lessons that Snake took him to heart entirely. He still suffered from his past and letting him defining it. It was at the end of the game where he ultimately decided that he doesn't need to fight anymore. I wouldn't say that's ruining his character.
Yeah, people completely ignore the different contexts of Metal Gear Solid 4 and Rising. Metal Gear Solid 4 was a commentary on how fans didn't understand MGS2, and since Raiden's the player, that allegory needed to be taken into account. But once Kojima made his point, he put Raiden back where he belonged. Raiden in Metal Gear Rising is Raiden in Metal Gear Solid 4, but without the irony.
It's that meme where it's just someone looking at a picture and they completely miss the point. In this case, it's, ooh, cool cyborg.
And the point is, Raiden became quote-unquote cool at the cost of his humanity. He shouldn't be like this. He should be himself and be with his family. But instead, people were like, ooh, cool ninja.
Ugh. Disgusting.
Just because Raiden's story didn't go the way you expected doesn't mean it's bad.
Okay, I use this argument whenever people shit talk Ruby's story when they share a particularly awful take that shows that they don't understand the story of that series. And while it is kind of a shitty argument to pull, the people in the Ruby fandom have shown that, yes, they are the type of people to be mad that a story didn't go the way they wanted to. My issue with Rising and Raiden's portrayal isn't that it didn't go the way I wanted it to go. The problem is that it's just sharing this really terrible message about mental health. And there's no option for me to change Raiden's story. It's like no matter how I play the game, I could go through the entire game, going through it, only killing Gecko and the bosses, and any other machines. The game will still end with Raiden embracing his trauma, therefore it doesn't matter what I do. And this is a game, I should have more control over what happens in the story based on my actions. This isn't a movie or a TV show, this is a video game, where there have been stories where you can influence a character's outcome in their story, like Silent Hill 2. But no, Rising doesn't give me that option, so fuck it, I guess.
What do you say to people who use Metal Gear Rising as an example of Konami being able to make a good Metal Gear game without Kojima?
On a gameplay level, okay, maybe, because, you know, as much as I may criticize Rising's combat, I could definitely see the appeal of it. That doesn't excuse the really half-assed stealth sections that just felt like they were thrown in there just to be like, look guys, it's a real Metal Gear game. We have cardboard boxes, surveillance cameras, stealth, infrared sensors. See, this is a real Metal Gear game, but it's an extreme Metal Gear game. But as far as its story is concerned, which I would argue is just as integral as the gameplay to a Metal Gear game, I don't want a series that's supposed to be about building towards a better future, saying that your trauma doesn't define who you are as a person, only to go into the opposite direction of, what? No, your trauma makes you cool. Without your trauma, you wouldn't be powerful or strong as you are now, because remember, it's all for the greater good. So to anyone who uses that argument, I feel like you only care more about the gameplay of Metal Gear more than the story and characters, and you can't really separate both of them if you ask me.
Or they just care about the lore rather than the subtext of the series. Like, funnily enough, if the game was canon, it would have the least amount of retcons in any game since Metal Gear Solid 2. But to me, the lore doesn't matter. As I said, the Metal Gear mythology is just a vessel for Kojima to share his message. I don't care that Metal Gear Rising doesn't contradict the fact that Snake speaks 6 languages. Who gives a shit? What matters is the story and the themes. And Rising tramples all over that.
Yeah, and it's actually pretty disrespectful in that regard.
And to me, the biggest fuck you as a Solid Snake fan, you know, I did that eulogy to Solid Snake at the end of the Metal Gear Solid 4 episode.
Very amazing eulogy, by the way.
Thank you. Here's what Metal Gear Rising does with that. So early on in the game, you can have Raiden call Kevin, and he'll talk about how he used to be called Jack the Ripper as a child soldier. Then he says, someone once told me, you can find your own name, and your own future. After that, I left behind Jack for good. Then a couple chapters later, he embraces being Jack the Ripper. And then you meet up with Senator Armstrong, and after you defeat him, Armstrong declares Raiden to be his successor, telling Raiden to carve his own path. The PMCs of the world are fighting for reasons they don't understand, causes they don't believe in. But Armstrong wants Jack to carve his own path, not let legal bullshit get in the way, and if it costs a few lives, so be it. Raiden does nothing to dispute Senator Armstrong's claims. And in fact, after the credits, Raiden even quotes Senator Armstrong, saying that the PMCs that are now in demand again are fighting for reasons they don't understand and causes they don't believe in, and declares that he has his own war to fight. Which is what Armstrong wanted. He wanted people to fight their own wars. So this game has supplanted Solid Snake with Senator Armstrong. Let that sink in.
Fuck you, Snake, I guess.
And this is why Metal Gear Rising is horrible. Its message is that people with trauma have no chance of living a happy life. They can never heal, they can never get better, the only thing they can do is just give in. Not only does this completely go against what Kojima's games stand for, it's also a huge insult to people in real life who have gone through traumatic experiences. By defending this game and the way it portrays Raiden, you're basically saying that these people should just give up hope, which is the exact opposite of what Kojima wanted to do with his games. Like, if you recall from our Metal Gear Solid 1 episode, I bring up that interview Kojima did for Police Knots, where he talks about how he wants to play catch with the player, but the ball is the themes he wants to convey. And with Metal Gear Solid 2, what Kojima wanted to pass on to the player was, okay, maybe back then you didn't have much in terms of choices, or maybe in the past you picked a wrong choice, but right now, you can decide a better future for yourself. You can decide to not let your past define you. And even in Metal Gear Solid 4, where it seemed like Kojima was going back on that, no, instead he had Old Snake continue to reiterate this to Raiden. Like, people do go through relapses, and that's what Metal Gear Solid 4 depicts. But it's not letting go of that core message from Metal Gear Solid 2, it's just trying to re-emphasize it. But on the other hand, Metal Gear Rising tells these people, no, you are doomed to repeat the same mistakes. You can never truly heal from past traumas. It will always be with you, and you can never, ever get better from it.
I'm willing to bet that maybe most of this wasn't intentional on the writer's part, because that is a possibility that I often think about. Maybe they didn't mean to convey it in such a way, but it ultimately does come off that way, and even though I haven't gone through the most traumatic experiences, I still have gone through some trauma in my life, and honestly, being told, yeah, you're just doomed to be a failure, it doesn't paint a good message. Like, if someone who was more emotionally vulnerable were to play this game and pick up on that, they'd probably feel like they're damned in their situation. I know, because I've been there before. Granted, I'm in a better place than I was a few years ago, but even now I still find Rising's depiction of trauma to be very, at best, misguided, and at worst, disgusting.
You might be right, it might not be intentional. Maybe Metal Gear Rising is just a goofy, fun game that you're not supposed to take seriously. Okay, then the people behind the game never should have pretended that this game is canon. It is part of a larger story that is very much about conveying a message to the player. And use a character whose whole arc is about healing from trauma, deciding your own fate, and instead have him go back on all that and embrace all his past traumas. Because according to this game's narrative, that's the only way he can be happy.
But I cut better if I give into my trauma.
And this brings us to the canon debate. Now, yes, Yuji Corcado did say that Metal Gear Rising is canon. But really, who cares what he thinks? Ultimately, this is Kojima's series, and he has the final say in what is or isn't part of his story. So as I said before, Kojima considers Rising a spin-off, and that he has yet to pass down the numbered series, the official canon Metal Gear yet. But that video is kind of hard to come by, especially now that Game Trailers is down. Thankfully, I have an archive of it on my hard drive. A more recent interview, published shortly after the game was released, had the interviewer ask Kojima, so Metal Gear Rising, it's not a numbered entry, but is it just as pivotal as a numbered game? And will the game's events be referred to in later entries in the series? Kojima explained that, Metal Gear Rising is a spin-off about Raiden. Having said that, the game is set after Metal Gear Solid 4, so in that sense, it is a continuation of the saga and a continuation of the Metal Gear world. However, this time we're working with Platinum Games, so the story is a little bit different from what I have in mind for the story of what happens after Metal Gear Solid 4. So it's kind of Platinum's take on the saga, and their take on the Metal Gear world. So, in that sense, I guess you could say it's sort of a parallel story, as well as a continuation, but it's Platinum's take on the Metal Gear universe. What do you think that means?
It means that Metal Gear Rising isn't canon.
You would think. But you see, because Kojima said it takes place after 4, and can therefore, in a sense, be considered a continuation of the saga, people honed in on that part of his answer and ignored everything else, ignored all of his qualifications.
Jesus Christ, the fucking S3 plan is taking effect.
Yep, people only hear what they want to hear. Some people say that unless Kojima makes a game about his idea of what happens after Metal Gear Solid 4 that contradicts Rising, then Rising is canon by default.
That's not how canonicity works.
Yes, exactly. Kojima doesn't have to make a whole game set after Metal Gear Solid 4 just to overturn Rising, because Metal Gear Solid 4 is the ending. It is the end of the story. It's like telling William Shakespeare that, unless he makes a Romeo and Juliet 2, then my fanfiction where they come back to life as zombies is canon by default. Now granted, that answer was Kojima trying to tiptoe around the answer, because of course he's still trying to sell the game. But after Konami's restructuring in 2015, Kojima knew he was on his way out, and so that's when Kojima decided to say, fuck it, and make his opinion on the series crystal clear. Let me get the exact quote up. I always say this will be my last Metal Gear, but the games in the series that I have personally designed and produce, Metal Gear on MSX, Metal Gear 2, Metal Gear Solid 1, 2, 3, 4, and Peace Walker, and now Metal Gear Solid 5, are what constitute a single Metal Gear saga. With Metal Gear Solid 5, I am finally closing the loop on that saga. In that sense, this will be the final Metal Gear Solid. Even if the Metal Gear franchise continues, to me, this is the last Metal Gear. Now, that last part is very important, because as you might recall, Kojima said he would love for the series to continue on even after he died, but now that Konami is firing him before he could find a proper successor, and him seeing what his younger staff were able to produce without him, it's clear that, in his mind, he didn't find a successor in time before he was pushed out of his franchise. So him saying that, even if the Metal Gear franchise continues, to him, Metal Gear Solid 5 is the last Metal Gear, that's him closing the door on there ever being a true Metal Gear game without him. He has officially given up. Metal Gear dies with him.
No, but Metal Gear Rising exists, therefore you can make a good Metal Gear game without Kojima.
Or Portable Ops, he also used that as an example.
Yeah, that's a reason why you selected those two games in particular to talk about for these episodes.
Mm-hmm. One last rhetorical question.
Yeah?
Does it really matter what Kojima thinks is canon? I mean, he's no longer part of Konami. Meanwhile, Yuji Corcado is still at Konami, and he's pretty much the leader of the franchise now. So if anything, his words should matter more than Kojima now. So does it really matter what Kojima thinks is canon? Isn't he just being a diva?
Well, you see, I would agree with Kojima being a diva had Metal Gear not been entrenched with his ideas and philosophies. Because you can't really separate Metal Gear from Kojima. I mean, I know there have been plenty of Metal Gear games made without his direct involvement. But as far as, like, the main games are concerned, the ones that people know the most, you can't separate Kojima from them, because that series is his personal expression. His thoughts, ideas, principles, they're all in those games. It's very much his series. So to tell me that, oh, well, we don't need Kojima, his word doesn't matter, he's just the guy who made the series. We have a new guy who took over, so his opinion doesn't really matter. It's pretty disgusting.
Yeah, and Yuji Corcado, under his brilliant guidance, we got Metal Gear fucking Survive.
Which Metal Gear did not survive after this game, ironically enough.
No, but it was dragged to the back of the shed and shot in the fucking head.
I remember hearing when this game was coming out, I actually even saw the trailer, so I had no context to what was happening in the real Metal Gear Solid 5, but I just remember seeing these characters dragged into, like, this fucking interdimensional portal, and the next thing I know, they're fighting zombies, and I also hear that this game is going to be a online multiplayer game, a zombie one, so that's another one to the fucking pile of zombie games. And then I hear about how if you want to make another save slot, you need to pay $10 for it. Which, I had no interest in that game anyway, but had I did, being told, yeah, you need to pay $10 to make another save slot is fucking stupid, and that would have turned me off from even playing the game.
And what's annoying is a lot of people keep trying to pin Survive on Kojima, saying that it was an idea that originated from him. Like, they'll say that, oh, Konami was hiring for Metal Gear Survive, while Kojima was still at Konami. Oh, you mean when Kojima was locked in a room for 6 months, not able to directly communicate with his team? Yeah, that actually happened. Jeff Keighley talked about it at the Game Awards 2016, and Jeff Keighley is one of Kojima's confidants.
It's disgusting.
And Kojima himself clarified that he had nothing to do with Survive. He said, Metal Gear is a political espionage series. Where do zombies fit in with that?
They don't.
Now, of course, some people bring up Kojima's idea for Metal Gear Rising 2, where Gray Fox would fight zombies powered by nanomachines. And it's like, okay, Kojima came up with a silly idea for a sequel to a game that he doesn't consider canon. Okay, I know I'm autistic, but can you guys please learn what humor is? Like, if you read that interview, Kojima was like, I told Platinum I would even write the script. But they were like, no, we can write it on our own. Don't worry. Like, in context, he was obviously just goofing off. And then they'll say, oh, but Metal Gear Solid 5 had zombies in it. No, it didn't. It had people who were infected with a parasite. Just like the Ganados in Resident Evil 4. Which are explicitly not zombies.
I know people would probably want to point out that Metal Gear Solid 2 had a skateboarding minigame, so having Metal Gear content that's not exclusively stealth is not out of nowhere. Had this been like an extra mode for Metal Gear Solid 5, I don't think the backlash would have been as huge.
Yeah, and that's the thing. There's something wrong with Metal Gear being silly. Like, there's a skateboarding minigame. In Metal Gear Solid 3, there was Snake versus the monkey.
You mean his snake?
Duh. It's like Snake running around different maps, fighting the robot monkeys from Ape Escape.
Metal Gear is goofy as shit, but, like, there's a limit.
Well, I'm not even saying that. I'm just saying, after the PR disaster that was Kojima breaking up with Konami, you would think that their first order of business would be to do something to win back the fans. Like, I don't know, remaster all the other games and bring them to modern systems. Like, for the love of God, have Bluepoint untangle Metal Gear Solid 4's code and port it to PS4. Please. So we can get the game off PS3. And then just port the HD collection and emulate MGS1. That way we can have the whole saga on modern systems. Or they could do stuff that I wouldn't like, but a lot of fans would like finish up Kingdom of Flies, or remake the MSX games. Again, I don't want that, but it would win back a lot of fans if Konami did do that. But instead, they turned Metal Gear into an always online zombie survival looter shooter. Another one.
That is what we like to call taking the L.
Oh, and by the way, a lot of fans have accepted that Metal Gear Survive is not canon, and it's because of this quote from a Konami Reddit account. The story takes place directly after Ground Zeroes, and some elements may remind you of Ground Zeroes and Phantom Pain, but the story should be considered as a parallel story, like the side missions in Ground Zeroes. So Konami is saying that Survive takes place after Ground Zeroes, but is a parallel story, which many fans take to mean that the game is non-canon. That reminds me of when Kojima said that Rising takes place after Metal Gear Solid 4, but considers it a parallel story.
But Rising good, though.
I think there's a double standard here.
No, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to see that.
Oh, and another funny thing, the guy who wrote Metal Gear Survive's story is the same guy who wrote Portable Ops' story.
So I'm guessing that game's story has a whole lot of nothing either.
I tried to watch the game's cutscenes, and I was bored to tears. But I was reading the comments, and one of them was very interesting. The guy said, "The writing is horrible. It's like the guy is trying to imitate Kojima's style, but just sucking at it." And then some people replied to that comment saying, "Oh, but the guy wrote Portable Ops." And then other people replied, "Just because he wrote something good doesn't mean everything he writes is good." And I just think that's funny. When stripped of iconic characters and any illusions of the story being important, people recognize that the writer is garbage. Interesting.
Big think. It really makes you think.
Now, there's actually one really cool detail about Metal Gear Survive, believe it or not.
What is it?
So, in the very first cutscene, there's a guy with a clipboard, and it has a bunch of code names on it.
Wait, I think I heard of this. Is it the Kojima Forever shit?
Yes!
Oh my god, I actually remember hearing about that when this game was going through its fucking public execution, so to speak, where not only did I have to hear about the $10 save slot bullshit, I also had to hear about this as well.
Alright, so for those who don't know, one of the characters in the first cutscene has a clipboard of various code names of fallen MSF comrades. And if you look at the last names, they seem to convey a message. So the first name is Vengeful Mosquito, but the next two are Iron Marlin and Dire Gibbon. Those two people are listed as KIA, and the initials of their last name, MG, potentially stands for Metal Gear, as in Metal Gear was killed in action.
I mean, it kind of was.
Right, and if you go down the list of last initials, KJP, then it's your custom character name, FOREVER. KJP Forever, as in Kojima Productions Forever.
And Konami did not see any of this.
Now here's the part that's most relevant to our Metal Gear Rising discussion. The last two names actually refer to people who are on staff at Konami making Metal Gear Survive. There's Bastard Yota, as in the game's director, Yota Tsusumu. I can't pronounce that.
I thought his name was actually Bastard Yota.
No, that's his code name. And then there's Cunning Yuji, as in the game's producer, Yuji Corcado, our old friend. Now, in Japanese, the word cunning has harsher connotations. It's like deceptive. And these last two people are listed as AWOL, as in they are derelict in their duties. They allowed Metal Gear to be killed by Konami.
Jesus Christ.
So, I'm sorry, but I'm supposed to take Cunning Yuji seriously when he says that Metal Gear Rising is canon? Fuck that. So, Hub, what are your final thoughts on these non-Kojima Metal Gear games?
I didn't play Portable Ops, but I wouldn't be surprised if I didn't care about it. I think Rising is an okay game, but I really don't like its story or its implications about what it says about trauma victims and one's response to trauma. And Metal Gear Survive should win the award for most stereotypical game of the 8th generation of consoles. That's really it. Although, I will try Ghost Babel at some point, just because you seem to really like it. I don't know when I'll try Ghost Babel. Maybe at some point in the future, after I finish Metal Gear Solid 5, we can do like a mixed topic episode to which I say, well, I played Metal Gear Ghost Babel. But other than that, I don't think I'm gonna be really playing the non-Kojima Metal Gear games, because a lot of them just don't really seem that interesting to me.
And that concludes our discussion of Metal Gear without Kojima. So right now we're still in emergency Ruby mode. We only did these episodes because they're pretty quick to get through. The next game we're going to cover is Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker. I think we'll do that after I watch Volume 7 of Ruby, and then we'll play together in co-op.
Yeah, baby.
But until then, You've been listening to Autism Exchange, the only show where two Aspies share the things they're obsessed with. I'm ForceWave.
And I'm HubPie, and Autism Exchanging is just another part of the life of the average Aspie.
Have a nice day.
Bye.